Hey folks, I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the opening issues of the Civil War. The book does an excellent job of running through most of these, but there is a debate that the book doesn't really cover. And that's the kind of lingering a lot of times on social media and stuff about was the war over some kind of vague concept of states' rights, or was it primarily over slavery? And honestly, it's really too difficult to nail that down one way or the other. You can't really do that. You really have to go look at it from what is the North fighting for, and what's the South fighting for. Um, in 1860, uh, immediately after Lincoln's elected and South Carolina secedes and other states follow South Carolina into the Confederacy, uh, once Lincoln is sworn into office, the primary goal for the North is preservation of the Union. Um, there's a lot of people in the North that are anti-slavery, a lot of people that are abolitionists, and they're absolutely fighting to end slavery. And Lincoln himself, please don't get me wrong, Lincoln himself is an abolitionist. He would love slavery to end yesterday. But Lincoln's primary responsibility is the safeguarding of the United States. And, Lincoln even says in a letter to Horace Greeley, he says, and I'm super paraphrasing, if I could preserve the Union by freeing all of the slaves, I would do that. If I could preserve the Union by freeing none of the slaves, I would do that. If I could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves and leaving others in bondage, I would do that. And so Lincoln's primary goal, even though he would absolutely think it would be fantastic to end slavery. His primary goal at the start of the war is to preserve the Union. That's the central focus. And that's the way a lot of Northerners felt as well. Later on, following Antietam, the Battle of Antietam, also called Sharpsburg, Lincoln will issue the Emancipation Proclamation. He's gotten enough political capital to be able to roll ending slavery into the war as a goal. So starting about end of 1862, Lincoln is going to start moving in that direction. So at that point, he wants to end preserve the Union as well as end slavery. And so even the North's goals are, a little bit complicated. From the South, though, we hear a lot of times, this debate over whether or not the South seceded over states' rights or whether they seceded primarily over slavery. And uh, honestly, the South seceded absolutely over slavery. The issue of states' rights actually becomes a justification for the South seceding from the Union after the war. In 1865-66, you're going to see Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, the vice president of the Confederacy. They're going to start trying to shift the narrative and say that no, the South didn't secede over slavery, it seceded over states' rights. And we kind of need to think about why they would do something like that. Because the evidence clearly says, hey, this is absolutely slavery. The Mississippi Declaration of Secession, they don't make any bones about they're seceding over secession. Alabama lists a document, and several other states do as well. But Alabama has a document called the Ordinances of Secession, and this is about, I don't know, a handful of Confederate states do this. And the Ordinance of Secession for Alabama mentions slavery, I think, either 7 to 9 times. They don't mention states' rights. Texas, not to be outdone by anyone, their Ordinance of Secession, I believe it's 2 to 3 pages long. It mentions slavery 20 times, not a mention of states' rights. And Alexander Stephens, again, Vice President of the Confederacy, makes a really important speech. Go look this up and read through it. It's called the Cornerstone Speech. And Stevens says clearly in there, and I'm slightly paraphrasing, but I've got this one down fairly well. He says that the cornerstone of the Confederacy rests on the institution of slavery. We're establishing a country based on slavery is what Stevens is saying. So, that idea that the Civil War, the South seceded over states' rights is really, really disingenuous. But here's where a lot of historians kind of argue that why is there this debate? Well, for me personally, my ancestors, some of them were guerrilla fighters that fought for the Union, which is kind of cool. But some of my ancestors were Confederates. They fought for the Confederacy. They also owned slaves. They fought for the preservation of slavery. Well, that's not something that really feels, honorable. That's not something that you have any kind of pride in. You shouldn't have any kind of pride in it, and I absolutely don't. But you don't want to think about your ancestors in that light. But if we could kind of shift it and say, well, they fought for the states' rights. Well, technically, that could be true. But here's the sticker on it. The only states' right that people in the South had, that people in the North did not, was the right to own people. And so saying states' rights, yeah, technically you're correct, but the only thing that Southerners could do that Northerners couldn't was to own slaves. And so it allows us to sort of say, hey, especially from a Southern perspective, well, our ancestors, a lot of our ancestors fought for the South, and we can feel, somewhat good about that, or even good about that if we kind of move it and say that it was about states' rights. People after the Civil War, immediately after the Civil War in the South, realized this as well. And you've got, Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stephens and a load of other people shifting that argument, saying that this was about states' rights, it wasn't about slavery. And that way you can the people of the South can say, we fought for this noble cause. Well, slavery is not a noble cause, it's not an honorable cause. And to sort of shift things and make it an acceptable thing to have some pride in, that's where you're going to see that shift. So it's honestly, the Confederacy, seceded over slavery. There were some other factors, but honestly, without slavery, you don't have a Civil War. You have some arguments and some disagreements, but you don't have a Civil War. So I just wanted to kind of chime in there. The discussion question this week, one of them asks about that. Why do you think we kind of jump onto this idea of states? Some people jump onto this idea of states' rights and kind of try to bury the whole idea of slavery. Take a look at that question if you want to answer that one. Chime in what you think about what I've said here, or just kind of go off and do some other research on your own and figure some stuff out. All right. Thanks. See you later.